The restaurant was alive with soft chatter and the clinking of glasses. The smell of fine food and polished wood filled the air. Among the waitstaff, one young woman moved quietly between tables, her steps careful and almost unnoticed. She carried plates with practiced grace, smiled politely, and listened to guests' small talk, but she stayed in the background. Most people barely noticed her at all. She had worked here for a long time, longer than anyone remembered, always polite, always quiet, and always dependable. Her uniform was simple, her hair tied neatly, her hands steady from years of careful work. She didn't complain, didn't seek attention, and never asked for anything beyond her wages. Her life outside the restaurant was not easy. She lived in a small apartment in a crowded part of the city, sharing it with her younger sibling and elderly grandmother. Money was always tight. She often skipped meals to make sure there was enough for everyone else. She had dreams once, big dreams of music and performance, but those dreams had been put aside years ago when reality became too heavy. Music had been her companion since she was a child. She remembered the hours spent practicing on an old, slightly out-of-tune piano at home, her fingers stumbling at first, then finding rhythm and melody, filling her small apartment with the sound of hope. But life demanded more practical choices, and she had taken this job to support her family. Piano lessons were abandoned, and the dream of performing seemed like a distant memory. The restaurant she worked in was elegant, catering to the city's wealthy and influential. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting light over polished tables and fine china. There was a grand piano in the corner, gleaming under a spotlight. It was mostly decorative, except when professional musicians were hired for special events. Usually, it remained untouched, a silent witness to the daily comings and goings of guests who were too busy with business deals and social chatter to notice it. She had often stopped to look at it while cleaning or passing by, her fingers brushing the keys sometimes, almost instinctively, feeling the familiar grooves of the black and white keys. But she never played in front of anyone. The idea of performing again, even for a small crowd, had seemed impossible. On this particular evening, the restaurant was hosting a high-profile private event. The room was filled with businessmen, socialites, and a few celebrities. The air was tense with the excitement of deals being discussed and plans being made. The event required music to set the tone, and a pianist had been scheduled to play during dinner. Everything was going smoothly until a sudden problem arose. The pianist had failed to show up. No call, no explanation, just an empty seat beside the grand piano. The manager's face turned pale when he realized the situation. The music was supposed to be part of the evening's charm, and without it, the atmosphere would feel incomplete, awkward, and disappointing to the high-paying guests. He whispered urgently to the head waiter, pacing back and forth, clearly panicked. The young waitress stood nearby, holding a tray of wine glasses, listening to the whispers and seeing the tension on the manager's face. She felt a tight knot of anxiety in her chest. She knew the piano. She knew it very well, but it had been years since she played in front of anyone. The thought of attempting it now, in front of the city's elite, made her heart race. She could almost hear the silent judgment, the potential embarrassment, and the shame of failing in front of so many people who would probably never care for her in any case. Yet, there was also a small, stubborn part of her that remembered the joy of playing, the way music could reach people in ways words never could. She hesitated, her fingers curling nervously around the tray she was holding. The manager, noticing her hesitation, came over and said sharply, "We need someone to play now. Where is that pianist?" "She hasn't arrived," someone murmured. The manager looked around, panic in his eyes. "Anyone? Can anyone play? Even a little?" For a moment there was silence. All eyes turned, almost without thinking, toward her. It was as if the room itself was asking, and she felt a sudden, overwhelming weight on her shoulders. Without fully thinking, she found herself speaking softly, "I can try." The words surprised even her. The manager's eyes widened. "You? Do you know how to play?" She nodded, feeling her hands tremble slightly. "Yes, I used to. A long time ago." He hesitated, clearly torn between disbelief and desperation. Finally, he sighed and said, "Do it, please. Just don't embarrass us." She walked to the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. Guests murmured, some curious, some skeptical. She took a deep breath and sat down on the bench, her hands hovering over the keys. The spotlight felt warmer than she expected. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, recalling the hours she had spent as a child, the way her fingers had danced across the keys, the melodies that had once filled her tiny apartment and lifted her spirits. Felt like meeting an old friend she had not seen in years. Her first notes were soft, almost hesitant. She stumbled slightly, as though testing the water. She could hear the faint whispers of guests, a low murmur of curiosity and expectation. But then something shifted. The music began to flow more smoothly, gaining confidence. Each note seemed to find its place naturally, and she felt herself slipping into the rhythm she had known so well. The sound was not perfect, but it was full of feeling, a raw and honest expression that could not be ignored. She closed her eyes and let the music take over, each note carrying a part of her story, her struggles, and her long-suppressed dreams. The guests, initially polite and reserved, began to pay attention. Conversations slowed, glasses were set down, and eyes turned toward her. Some leaned slightly forward, as if trying to catch every nuance of the music. The wealthy, powerful people who usually seemed unshakable were visibly moved. Their expressions softened, some leaning back in their chairs, lost in the melody that seemed to float above them. It was a sound that came not from technique alone, but from heart and experience. There was a story woven into each chord, a life of quiet sacrifice and hidden talent. She could feel the emotion in the room, feeding her performance. The initial fear that had gripped her vanished, replaced by a sense of purpose. This was her moment, her chance to share what had been locked away for so long. She didn't think about money, status, or judgment. She only thought about the music and how it could touch the people around her. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, and the music became richer, more complex, but always with feeling. Every note told a part of her life story. The long hours of work, the dreams deferred, the small joys of music in an otherwise hard world. By the time she finished the first piece, the room was silent. The guests sat frozen, as if they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The manager, who had been pacing anxiously, stopped in his tracks. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. He opened his mouth to speak but found no words. Even he, hardened by years of running this restaurant, felt a chill at the sincerity and depth of her playing. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence was heavy and meaningful. Then one guest, an older woman in a designer gown, clapped softly. Others followed, and soon the applause grew louder, filling the room. It was genuine, spontaneous, and powerful. The waitress felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had done it. She had played in front of the wealthiest, most influential people in the city, and they had been captivated by her music. The manager finally approached her, his expression a mix of astonishment and admiration. That was incredible. I didn't know you could do that. She smiled shyly, still catching her breath. I used to play, a long time ago. A few of the guests began asking questions about her background, eager to learn more about this hidden talent they had just discovered. She answered politely but humbly, never boasting, never seeking the spotlight. She had simply shared her music, and it had spoken for her in a way words never could. As the evening continued, she returned to her duties, serving with the same quiet grace as before, but something had changed. She no longer felt invisible. For the first time in years, she felt recognized, not for her uniform or her service, but for her talent, her story, and her courage to step forward when no one expected it. That night, as she walked home after her shift, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement, she thought about the grand piano, the empty seat that had called her, and the music that had flowed through her fingers. She felt a spark of hope she had not felt in years. Life had been difficult, and she had been overlooked, but for one night, she had been seen. And it was a night she would never forget. The young waitress stayed at the piano, her hands hovering over the keys as the applause slowly died down. The room felt charged, as if every person present had paused to catch their breath after something extraordinary. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, not from fear this time, but from the strange mixture of exhilaration and disbelief. For a long moment, she simply sat there, letting the silence stretch. The patrons who had been talking and laughing before now watched her intently, their curiosity palpable. Some of them leaned slightly forward, their eyes wide, as if trying to take in every detail of the woman who had unexpectedly transformed the evening. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to relax, though her fingers were still tingling from the performance. She could feel the lingering energy in the room, the way the notes she had just played seemed to hang in the air, like a living thing. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten. The music had always been a private companion, something she poured herself into alone, but now it had reached out to strangers and touched them. That realization filled her with a quiet sense of wonder. Some of the guests began speaking softly among themselves, exchanging impressed murmurs. One man, older and distinguished-looking, gestured toward her with a smile that carried both surprise and admiration. The young waitress, noticing his expression, felt a small, nervous smile creep across her own face. She had expected confusion, maybe polite applause at best, but the genuine reactions were far beyond anything she had imagined. As she considered standing, a young couple at a nearby table stood first and began clapping. Slowly, the rest of the room followed, the initial soft applause swelling into a thunderous response. She blinked, overwhelmed, and allowed herself to stand too. Her hands brushed the piano keys, feeling the warm surface beneath her fingers, and she realized just how alive it all felt. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her quiet life and this world of attention and appreciation. Every note she had played had carried a piece of herself, a story of sacrifice, of love for music, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. A few of the guests approached her cautiously, not wanting to startle her, but eager to speak. The older man, who seemed particularly moved, said, "That was remarkable. I haven't heard anything like that in years. Do you play professionally?" She shook her head gently, feeling both shy and proud at the same time. "I used to study music when I was younger, but I stopped. Life became too busy," she said quietly. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but everyone within earshot seemed to catch her meaning. The guests listened, captivated not only by the music but also by the story it implied. They sensed the depth of emotion behind the notes, the years of practice, the sacrifices made, and the passion that had never faded. One of the women, elegant in her attire, remarked, "It's rare to see someone play with so much feeling. Talent like that doesn't come without hard work." The young waitress felt warmth rise in her chest. She had spent years in the shadows, unnoticed, but for this moment, she was recognized, not for her service, but for her skill and heart. Meanwhile, the manager, who had been watching nervously from a distance, finally approached her, his expression shifting from worry to amazement. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said, his voice filled with genuine surprise. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" She shrugged lightly, unsure how to explain years of quiet self-doubt and a life consumed by responsibility. "I never thought anyone would care," she admitted softly, her eyes downcast for just a moment before meeting his gaze again. Word of her talent spread quickly through the room. Guests who had arrived expecting a typical evening of dinner and conversation were now talking about the unexpected brilliance they had witnessed. One of the younger guests, clearly eager to share his excitement, asked if she had a chance to perform publicly. She shook her head again, a mix of modesty and hesitation. It wasn't that she didn't want to. It was that she had never imagined a world where people would truly listen to her music. For her, the piano had always been a private sanctuary, a place of solace and escape, not a stage for applause. Despite her shyness, she found herself drawn into conversation, answering questions about her background and how long she had been playing. She spoke of her childhood, the hours spent on the old, worn piano at home, and the joy of discovering melodies for herself. The guests listened intently, many leaning closer, eager to catch every word. They were not just impressed by her performance. They were intrigued by the story behind it, the journey of someone whose life had been defined by quiet dedication and unseen talent. As the evening continued, she returned to her duties, serving drinks and attending to tables, but the atmosphere around her had shifted. Where once she had moved unnoticed, she now carried a subtle air of recognition. Guests smiled at her as she passed, some offering compliments, others simply nodding in acknowledgement of the extraordinary moment they had shared. She felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. It was as if a door had opened that she hadn't even realized was there, revealing a world that had been hidden just beyond her reach. She caught herself glancing at the piano often, feeling a magnetic pull toward it even as she worked. The keys seemed to call to her, reminding her of the emotions she had poured into her performance. She realized that music was not just a skill or a hobby. It was a part of her identity, something that could not be suppressed, no matter how many years had passed or how many responsibilities had demanded her attention. Later, when the dinner service slowed and the guests were beginning to leave, one of the prominent attendees approached her directly. He was a businessman known for his influence in the city, and he spoke with a kind of quiet authority. "You have a gift," he said. "Have you ever considered performing outside of this restaurant?" She shook her head, a little startled by the question. "I never thought it was possible," she admitted, her voice tinged with both humility and surprise. He smiled warmly. "Talent like yours deserves to be heard by more than just a few people here tonight. I would like to help you find a way to share it with the world." She felt a rush of emotions, hope, fear, and disbelief all at once. She had never imagined that her music could reach beyond the walls of the restaurant, that anyone would care to hear it beyond polite applause and fleeting admiration. The manager, noticing the interaction, gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. It was clear that this was more than just a moment of recognition. It was the start of something new, something that could change her life. She felt her chest tighten with emotion, the weight of years of sacrifice and quiet persistence suddenly mingling with a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in a long time. As the last guests left and the room emptied, she sat back at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. The music that emerged was softer now, more reflective, almost like a conversation with herself. She played not for anyone else, but for the joy of it, for the memories it stirred, and for the dreams that had been quietly waiting to be awakened. The notes filled the empty restaurant, carrying with them the story of a young woman who had been overlooked for so long, yet had found a way to speak without words, to touch hearts, and to remind everyone, including herself, that hidden talent and quiet determination could shine when given the chance. That night, she left the restaurant with a new sense of purpose. The city streets were quiet, the cool night air brushing against her face, and she felt a renewed connection to the dreams she had once set aside. She knew that the night had been special, not only for the audience who had witnessed her music but for herself, as a reminder that she was capable of more than she had ever allowed herself to believe. And somewhere in the distance, the memory of the piano and the warmth of the applause lingered, promising that this night was only the beginning of a story that had yet to unfold. The applause continued to fill the restaurant, echoing off the walls and chandeliers, creating a sense of energy that seemed almost tangible. The young waitress, still at the piano, felt a mixture of surprise and disbelief. She had never expected such a reaction. It was one thing to play music she loved, but it was another entirely to see it touch people she had never met, to see their faces light up with admiration and genuine emotion. Her fingers rested on the keys as she allowed herself a small, nervous smile. The room had become completely silent for a moment, and in that silence, she could almost feel the heartbeat of everyone present. Then, as if following an unspoken cue, one of the guests, a distinguished woman in an elegant dress, stood up and clapped. It was slow at first, hesitant, but it carried an air of genuine appreciation. Others began to rise too, slowly at first, unsure of what to do, then with increasing confidence. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, giving her a standing ovation that was both surprising and exhilarating. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, a flush of embarrassment mixed with pride. She hadn't planned for this. She had only wanted to play a piece of music, to fill a moment with something beautiful, and now it had turned into a public celebration of her talent. A man at the center of the room, known for his business ventures and influence, stepped forward. He smiled warmly, his eyes full of admiration. "You have an incredible gift," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "It's rare to encounter someone who can move people with music in such a pure way." The young waitress felt her throat tighten. She had always believed that her talent was something personal, something that belonged to her and her memories, not to an audience of strangers. And yet, here they were, recognizing it, acknowledging it as if it had always belonged to the world. Guests continued to approach, some asking where she had trained, others curious about her background. She answered each question with quiet honesty, explaining that she had studied music as a child, but had been forced to put her dreams aside. Every word seemed to draw them closer, their interest not just in her skill but in the story behind it. They could sense the dedication, the years of practice, and the quiet sacrifices she had made. The applause and attention were becoming overwhelming, but in a way that filled her with a sense of purpose she had long forgotten. The manager, who had been pacing nervously in the corner, now approached her, a look of astonishment on his face. "I can't believe it," he said quietly. "Why didn't you ever tell us you could play like this?" She shrugged, a mix of modesty and shyness evident in her posture. "I never thought anyone would care," she admitted. The manager shook his head, a small smile breaking through his earlier worry. "You've just changed the night for everyone here," he said. "No, more than that. You've changed their lives for a few minutes, and that's something special." One of the younger guests, a man in a sharp suit, leaned toward her with excitement. "Have you ever thought about performing somewhere bigger? A concert, perhaps, or a recital?" She shook her head gently, feeling the weight of the question. It was an idea she had never allowed herself to consider seriously. Her life had been so focused on survival, on making sure her family had enough, that dreaming about stages and audiences seemed impossible. Yet now, hearing the enthusiasm in his voice, she felt a flicker of possibility, a small spark that had been dormant for years. The room continued to buzz with admiration and curiosity. Conversations resumed, but this time they revolved around her, her talent, and the incredible performance they had just witnessed. Guests discussed the emotions conveyed, the passion behind every note, and the unexpected beauty that had filled the space. She moved among them now, smiling politely as they praised her, feeling a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. It was as though she had stepped into a different world, a world where her abilities mattered, where her music could reach beyond her quiet existence. As she returned to the piano for a brief moment, she allowed herself to play a few soft, reflective notes. The sound was different now, more personal, almost intimate. She wasn't performing for the crowd. She was simply letting the music flow, letting it carry the emotions she had held inside for so long. The guests who noticed leaned closer, listening intently, sensing the connection she had with her instrument, the story woven into each chord. The older businessman who had first approached her returned, this time accompanied by a woman who appeared to be a philanthropist or patron of the arts. They exchanged a few words quietly, then turned toward her. "We would like to offer you an opportunity," the man said. "A chance to perform at an upcoming gala, to share your music with a wider audience. We believe that talent like yours should not remain hidden." She felt her heart skip a beat. The idea of performing beyond the restaurant, beyond the small moments she had allowed herself, was both thrilling and terrifying. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, unsure how to respond. The weight of the offer pressed on her, mingling with a cautious excitement. The manager, sensing her hesitation, gave her a reassuring nod. "You deserve this," he said quietly. "We've all seen what you can do." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The applause, the recognition, the standing ovation. It was a lot to process at once. But beneath the nerves and the doubt, there was a growing feeling of possibility. Perhaps this was a chance to reclaim a part of herself she had thought lost forever. Guests continued to approach, offering words of encouragement and admiration. Some suggested she consider professional training, others spoke of connections they could help her make. Every conversation felt like a thread, weaving together a tapestry of opportunity and hope. She listened carefully, taking it all in, feeling both overwhelmed and inspired. The quiet life she had known, filled with routine and responsibility, now seemed like it existed in a different reality. This night, these moments were opening doors she had never thought she could reach. As the evening wound down and the last guests prepared to leave, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The room was no longer tense or filled with anxious energy. It was warm, alive, and full of possibility. She glanced around, taking in the grand piano, the polished tables, and the faces of those who had witnessed her talent. It was a night that would stay with her forever, a turning point she could feel deep in her heart. After the guests had left, the manager came over to her one last time, a small smile on his face. "You've done something remarkable tonight," he said. "Not just for the restaurant, but for yourself. Don't ever forget that." She nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. His words were simple, but they carried a weight she understood fully. For years, she had gone unnoticed, blending into the background. Tonight, she had stepped forward and been seen, and it had changed something inside her. She sat back at the piano, allowing her fingers to move gently over the keys. The notes were soft, reflective, carrying the emotions of the evening, the joy, the fear, the courage, and the excitement of possibilities. Music had always been her refuge, her companion, and now it was becoming a bridge to a world she had never imagined. She felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected opportunity, for the audience that had embraced her talent, and for the moment when courage had overcome fear. Walking home later that night, the city streets quiet under the glow of streetlights, she replayed the events in her mind. The applause, the standing ovation, the recognition, the conversations, and the offer. It all felt like a dream, yet it was real. She realized that talent, when given a chance, could break through even the walls built by doubt and years of quiet self-effacement. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her music mattered, where her skills could reach beyond herself and her small apartment. It was a night she would remember forever, a night that had begun as a quiet, ordinary shift and ended as the first step towards something extraordinary. After the excitement of that unforgettable evening, the young waitress returned home, her mind still buzzing with the events that had unfolded. The city streets were quiet, but her thoughts were loud and insistent, replaying the applause, the standing ovation, and the encouraging words of the guests who had witnessed her performance. She walked slowly, absorbing the cool night air, feeling a strange mixture of exhilaration and nervousness. It was as if a door had opened in her life, revealing a world that she had once dreamed of, but had thought forever beyond her reach. She entered her small apartment, greeted by the familiar smells and sounds of her home. Her younger sibling was reading quietly in the corner, and her grandmother was asleep on the sofa. The normalcy of her surroundings contrasted sharply with the extraordinary events of the night, making it almost difficult to believe it had really happened. She sat down at the small table in the kitchen and let herself take a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. The offer from the businessman and the patron to perform at the gala kept replaying in her mind. It was tempting, almost too tempting to believe, but along with the excitement came a tide of self-doubt. She thought about all the years she had spent practicing quietly, all the sacrifices she had made, and all the moments she had spent hiding her talent. Could she really step into the world beyond her restaurant? Could she really perform in front of a much larger audience, with more at stake, with expectations that could crush her if she failed? Fear and doubt gnawed at her confidence, making her wonder if she was ready, if she was even good enough. She had played beautifully that one night, but was one performance enough to prove she belonged in a larger world of music? Despite the worry, a small spark of determination remained. She remembered the joy she had felt while playing, the feeling of connection that had grown between her and the audience. That joy, that moment of pure expression, had reminded her of who she really was. For years, she had been defined by necessity, by responsibility, by survival, but she had never truly forgotten the music that was part of her soul. This opportunity, as daunting as it seemed, was a chance to reclaim that part of herself. She made a promise to herself that she would not let fear hold her back. The next few days were filled with preparation. She began by dusting off her old sheet music, practicing in her apartment where no one could watch or judge. Her fingers remembered the keys almost instinctively, though they were stiff at first. She played slowly at first, rebuilding the strength and precision that had faded over the years, then gradually regained confidence and fluidity. She allowed herself to explore new pieces, expanding her repertoire and challenging herself with music that would stretch her abilities. Every note she played was a step toward the woman she had once dreamed of becoming. At the same time, she began to navigate the practical side of this new opportunity. She met with the businessman and the patron, who offered guidance and encouragement, helping her understand what was expected for the gala. They spoke about timing, presentation, and the audience, all the details that seemed overwhelming but also necessary. She listened carefully, absorbing every word, and began to visualize herself performing with confidence, imagining the music flowing from her fingers, touching hearts, just as it had in the restaurant. The pressure of preparation was intense, but she found herself thriving on the challenge. Each practice session strengthened not only her technical skill but also her belief in herself. She realized that her talent was not something that had faded with time. It had simply been dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. With each note, she felt herself growing stronger, more certain that she could meet this new challenge. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by determination and the memory of the night when her music had captivated the restaurant. Her family noticed the change in her as well. Her younger sibling asked questions, curious and excited, and her grandmother offered quiet encouragement, proud in her own way. The support, though simple, reinforced her courage. She began to share pieces of her practice with them, playing short melodies that filled their apartment with music once again. It was a reminder of why she had started playing in the first place. Not for fame or recognition, but for the joy it brought, for the connection it created, and for the part of herself that had always been music. As the day of the gala approached, nerves returned, stronger than before. She found herself second-guessing every decision, every note, and every movement. The thought of performing in front of an audience larger than the restaurant, filled with people whose opinions mattered and whose expectations were high, was intimidating. Yet, she reminded herself of the restaurant night, of the courage it had taken to sit at the piano and play despite fear. That night had proven to her that she could rise to challenges she had once thought impossible. She carried that memory with her, allowing it to bolster her confidence. On the morning of the gala, she woke early, feeling a mix of excitement and tension. She practiced one last time in her apartment, her fingers moving smoothly over the keys. She chose her pieces carefully, selecting music that showcased not only her skill but also the emotion she could convey. She wanted her performance to be a story, a reflection of her journey, and a connection to the hearts of those who would listen. She packed her sheet music carefully, along with a small bag of essentials, and left her apartment, stepping into the city streets with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Arriving at the gala, she was greeted by the grandeur of the venue, a space far larger and more opulent than the restaurant. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the room was filled with the city's influential figures, all dressed elegantly and speaking in hushed tones. The pianist had been confirmed for this event, but now she was the one who would perform. The realization made her heart race. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this was more than an opportunity. It was a chance to prove to herself that her talent mattered, that her music could touch people beyond the confines of the restaurant. Backstage, she met the event coordinator and other staff who would assist her. Their encouragement and professionalism helped ease some of the tension. They assured her that the audience was eager to hear her, that her reputation had already begun to spread from the restaurant, and that this was a moment for her to shine. She nodded, taking in the reassurance, and allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the years of quiet practice, the sacrifices, the self-doubt, and the small victories that had led to this moment. Every step had prepared her for this stage. As the time to perform drew near, she approached the grand piano, feeling its familiar keys beneath her fingertips. She sat down, allowing herself a moment to close her eyes and breathe deeply. The audience was waiting, and she could feel their anticipation, their curiosity, and their expectation. Yet, she did not focus on them. She focused on the music, on the connection she had with the piano, and on the joy that playing brought her. The first notes emerged, soft but confident, filling the room with a melody that spoke of years of hidden talent and quiet perseverance. The music flowed naturally, each note carrying her story, her struggles, and her renewed sense of purpose. As she continued to play, she noticed the audience's reactions. Faces softened, eyes closed, some leaning slightly forward as if trying to catch every detail. The music seemed to reach beyond words, touching emotions that were often hidden beneath the surface. She felt a deep connection with each listener, knowing that her music was not just being heard but felt. The room was alive with a shared experience, and she was at the center of it, not as a waitress, not as a quiet observer, but as a musician whose talent had found its voice once more. The performance ended, and the audience erupted into applause, this time louder and more enthusiastic than she could have imagined. The standing ovation confirmed what she had already begun to realize. This was her moment, and she had earned it through talent, dedication, and courage. She felt a rush of emotion, tears welling in her eyes, as she acknowledged the applause with a humble nod. The journey had been long, the challenges numerous, but she had arrived at a place where her dreams were no longer just memories. They were becoming reality. After the performance, she received congratulations from many guests, including musicians, patrons, and influential figures in the city. Offers for future performances, collaborations, and training opportunities were extended to her. Each conversation, each handshake, and each word of encouragement reinforced the idea that she had stepped into a new chapter of her life. The young waitress, once invisible and overlooked, had now been seen and appreciated for her true self. Returning home that night, she reflected on the whirlwind of experiences. From the quiet life in her apartment to the electrifying performance at the gala, she realized that courage, dedication, and the willingness to step forward despite fear could create life-changing moments. Music had been her companion through solitude and struggle, and now it was her bridge to recognition, opportunity, and fulfillment. She knew that the journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt that she could face the future with hope, confidence, and the knowledge that her talent had a place in the world. The night of the big performance arrived, and the young woman felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she had never experienced before. The gala hall was magnificent, filled with lights that sparkled off the chandeliers and polished floors. People in elegant attire moved gracefully across the room, speaking in quiet tones. She could hear the low hum of conversation, punctuated by laughter and soft clinking of glasses. The atmosphere was both intimidating and exhilarating, and she felt her heart beat faster with every passing moment. Backstage, she took a deep breath and looked at the grand piano waiting for her. Its polished surface reflected the lights from the stage, and its keys seemed to call her, familiar and comforting. She reminded herself of all the practice she had done in the days leading up to this night, the hours she had spent rebuilding her confidence, and the memories of the first time she had played in the restaurant. Each note had carried a piece of her soul that night, and now she had a chance to do it again on a larger stage. The event coordinator gave her a reassuring nod and whispered, "You're ready. Go out there and play, and remember, they're here to listen to you." She nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. She walked onto the stage slowly, taking in the sight of the audience. The room was filled with influential people, patrons of the arts, and music lovers who had heard about her talent. The attention was overwhelming, but she focused on what mattered most: the music. She sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. For a moment, She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She thought of all the years she had practiced in silence, the sacrifices, the challenges, and the moments when she doubted herself. And she thought of the joy music had always brought her, a joy that no fear or hardship could take away. That joy now fueled her courage, and she began to play. The first notes were soft and gentle, filling the hall with a melody that seemed to float in the air. As she continued, her confidence grew, and the music became more expressive, more vibrant. Each note carried emotion, telling a story without words. She poured everything she had into the performance. The years of practice, the quiet nights of dedication, the hidden dreams she had nurtured despite the obstacles. The audience listened in rapt attention, captivated by the depth and sincerity of her playing. Faces in the crowd showed a range of emotions. Some were visibly moved, eyes closed as if the music had reached deep inside them. Others leaned forward in their seats, drawn into the beauty of the melodies and the passion behind them. The energy in the room was palpable, and she felt a powerful connection with every person present. For the first time in her life, she realized that her music had the ability to touch people beyond the walls of her home or the restaurant, to create a shared experience that was deeply human and profoundly moving. As she continued, the music became more dynamic, with crescendos and gentle lulls that showcased both her technical skill and her emotional expression. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in closer, letting the notes resonate within them. She felt a sense of freedom, a release of all the doubts and fears that had held her back. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a voice that could communicate what words could not. The performance reached its climax, and she played with a power and confidence that took her by surprise. Every chord was deliberate, every movement precise yet full of feeling. The hall seemed to vibrate with the energy of the music, and she could sense the audience holding their collective breath, waiting for the final notes. When she finished, the silence that followed was profound, filled with awe and appreciation. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted into applause, cheers, and whistles. People rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically, and she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Tears pricked her eyes as she stood to acknowledge the audience, humbled and grateful for the recognition. After the performance, several guests approached her, offering compliments, congratulations, and words of encouragement. Musicians praised her technique and expression, patrons of the arts expressed admiration for her courage and talent, and influential figures offered opportunities for future performances and collaborations. She listened carefully, taking in every word, feeling both overwhelmed and inspired. The recognition was more than she had ever imagined, and it validated the years of dedication and perseverance that had brought her to this moment. The event organizer approached her with a smile. "You were incredible," they said. "People are already talking about your performance. You have a gift, and it's clear that the world should hear more of it." She nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride. The journey from the quiet, unnoticed waitress to the center of attention on a grand stage seemed almost surreal. Yet it was real and it was hers. In the days following the gala, her life began to change in small but significant ways. She received invitations to perform at private events, concerts, and community gatherings. People reached out to offer mentorship, training, and support, helping her navigate the new opportunities that were opening before her. She continued to work at the restaurant, but her role there had shifted subtly. Guests recognized her, spoke to her with respect, and sometimes requested to hear her play. The piano in the corner was no longer just a decorative piece. It was a symbol of her talent, her courage, and the turning point that had begun in that restaurant. Her family noticed the change as well. Her younger sibling listened intently as she shared stories of her performances, and her grandmother offered quiet pride in her eyes. Music had once been a solitary passion, but now it was something that connected her with others, with the world, and with herself in a profound way. She continued to practice diligently, refining her skills, exploring new pieces, and preparing for each opportunity with care and dedication. Every note she played reminded her of the journey she had taken, from quiet perseverance to the recognition she now received. As she reflected on her experiences, she realized that her journey was not just about talent or recognition. It was about courage, perseverance, and the willingness to take a chance despite fear and self-doubt. She had spent years hidden in plain sight, her abilities overlooked and unacknowledged, yet she had never lost the love for her craft. By embracing her opportunity, she had transformed not only her own life, but also touched the lives of those who had listened, creating moments of shared beauty and human connection. Her story became an inspiration to others who faced similar struggles, showing that hidden talent could be discovered, nurtured, and shared, even in the most unlikely circumstances. She received messages from young musicians, people in the arts, and those who had felt invisible in their own lives, all expressing how her journey gave them hope and motivation. The recognition was humbling, but it also reinforced her commitment to continue playing, to continue sharing her music, and to never let fear hold her back again. Over time, she began to perform more regularly, building a reputation as a talented and expressive pianist. Each performance carried the same passion and emotion that had captivated the audience at the restaurant and the gala. She learned to balance her growing career with her personal life, always remembering the values that had guided her through years of quiet work and sacrifice. Music remained her sanctuary, her voice, and her connection to the world around her. In the end, she understood that the journey was not defined solely by a single night or performance. It was defined by years of dedication, resilience, and the courage to take a step forward when opportunity appeared. That first night at the restaurant had been the spark, and the gala had been the stage where she embraced her full potential. The standing ovation, the applause, and the recognition were all milestones along a path that she would continue to walk, one note at a time, sharing her gift and inspiring others along the way. As she sat at the piano one quiet evening, playing softly for herself, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The music flowed freely, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. She knew that her story was far from over, but she also knew that she had found her place in the world. The young waitress who had once been overlooked had become a musician who inspired, a woman who had reclaimed her dreams, and a person whose courage had transformed her life forever.